So what does it tell us that politicians are lying about this? Can you imagine? And why did the Biden administration, speaking of lying, just repeat a story about a 10-year-old child who got pregnant and then got an abortion or was not allowed to get an abortion when it turns out the story is not true? And by the way,
and the abortion doctor and the Indianapolis Star are misleading us, and the mainstream media and the president of the United States seizing on another hoax, then this is absolutely shameful.
I need to know that you have some evidence or access to evidence that this actually happened, because right now your misreporting or your disinformation potentially is taking down the president.
We do not have all of those answers at the moment, but right now it looks specious.
Well, it also was repeated by President Biden.
Correct.
And so that is another question here.
There is more than you can count. There are so many monsters out there. So for me, what I find so deeply offensive is that they had to make up a fake one.
Right, making up a fake story about a 10-year-old being raped and needing to seek an abortion. Of course, that was Fox News's line earlier this week, because it wasn't enough to hear from the 10-year-old's mom, to hear from the 10-year-old's physician, to hear from the physician who did finally attend her and get her an abortion in Indiana because she couldn't get one in Ohio. No, that wasn't enough. It was still a lie. This is the line that the right has been parroting for a while. But, wait a minute, what's that? I'm just getting word. News works in a way where new things come to light, man. And on Wednesday, yes, a 27-year-old man was apprehended and confessed to the rape of that 10-year-old girl. And wow, amazing, amazing. So like, what happened? Well, what did the Fox do? Where they were like, oh man, we should talk about abortion rights. We should talk about 10-year-olds and like how, yes, like this obviously criminalizes girls' rights to have bodily autonomy. If only. Here's what they were saying when they found out that information.
Learned that he is here illegally from Guatemala and he's residing illegally, and no one has. The act was reported, and for almost 3 weeks, he hasn't been charged. So we're gonna have to wait for more details, but it's mysterious. It's terrible what's going on.
So it sounds like in this case, as in pretty much every case we've reported on for the past 5 years, the first version was a lie. Everything is partisan propaganda, and kind of believe nothing at first. Maybe that's the takeaway.
In other words, we did no wrong. Let's focus on how this young girl was raped by an undocumented immigrant instead of her. Finally, Rick, before I go to you, there was a Chiron there on Tucker's show, but it was also kind of the same Chiron on Laura Ingram's show. Again, primetime Fox. Let's just read that Chiron. Look at this still. And then what does the Chiron say? Girl in Biden's abortion story was raped by an illegal. Like, this is some deep, like extremist fanfic. Yes. Girl in Biden abortion story raped by illegal, like, coming to the Daily Wire. Rick, thoughts on like this pivot?
Yeah, no, not much. How I see this is we have an entire ecosphere of media that has such disdain for what is actually factual. So they went from it being a hoax to then blaming the abortion doctor to them somehow turning it into like a Joe Biden story. And like, look, for many of us on this very small side of the aisle, he is not our guy. We call him out when he's wrong, but this is not his story. This is unfortunately an American story. But I do like how they were harder on fabricating a story about the president than they were on Bill Shine, than they were on Bill O'Reilly, than they were on Roger Ailes. And yet, even when all of this happens, do we ever hear Jesse Waters in his very way of framing something about something? Do they ever give, I need more bronzer. Do they ever actually give like a correction? Yeah. Isn't that what like ethics in journalism and media is supposed to be. But yeah, let's trust the guy who has like resting mouth breather facing Tucker Carlson and great replacement theory guy to just go on and talk smack when it's not warranted, and also the host who outed gay students at Dartmouth. But yeah, let's trust these people. It's insane, and I keep grappling with the fact that this is the most watched news network.
Yep.
I don't know how to like reverse that and go over the psychology of how to reverse that, but we have to find a way. I guess I'll leave it at that.
No, absolutely. And the fact that every single one of them was dispelling this story and casting doubt on it. And it's just incredible because to me, and we're gonna get into this is gonna keep happening. There are going to be children who become pregnant, who are denied abortions. Obviously, if that child is pregnant and if the person who impregnated them is over the age of 18, even if they're not, it's all rape. Like it's in the realm of statutory rape. That's what we're talking about here. And in the future, they're just not gonna cover it. Like this is the one shot we've got. They're pretending to care about the rapist instead of the kid. Now they're pretending to talk about the identity of the rapist instead of the kid. Again, let's go to this. Fuentes is a Guatemalan national. Ruben Fuentes is his name, who entered the US illegally. Fox reported, but it citing an unnamed source within the US and Immigration and Customs Enforcement. However, it's not just Fox News. There does seem to be a question there as to whether or not he's actually in the country legally. Again, as someone who thinks no human being is illegal, doesn't really matter. Doesn't really matter if this person was documented, undocumented, had papers, didn't have papers. Clearly, he's a terrible person. But the real issue is the rights of this child and their family.